I seemed to have transmigrated. When I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by a circle of blonde, blue-eyed people, babbling in a language I couldn't understand. Then my butt suddenly hurt, and I let out a loud wail, crying completely out of my control. I had actually turned into a baby. Well, transmigration wasn't exactly unfamiliar to me. What kind of transmigration drama from the 21st century hadn't I seen? But my way of transmigrating was way too low-end. Just because I drank a few beers at a company gathering, I went to sleep and woke up dead. If other fellow transmigrators found out about this, they'd probably laugh their teeth off. Then suddenly it hit me, and I remembered something fatal. I left so suddenly that I hadn't deleted my browser history yet. With a wah, I cried even louder than before, utterly heart-wrenching. It took me a long time to recover from the shame and start observing my surroundings. And what I saw was no small matter. Everyone was dressed in clothing in the style of the 18th or 19th century. There were also several people dressed like priests standing nearby, solemnly muttering something. My heartbeat instantly sped up. Had I transmigrated into some mysterious world with magic and supernatural powers? Unfortunately, many years later I realized I had been overthinking it. This was just an ordinary world. The most advanced invention was still the steam engine, and the most popular entertainment was watching opera, dancing, and horse racing. I missed smartphones, computers, and Wi-Fi terribly. But there was one thing worth being thankful for. The family I was reborn into this time was incredibly powerful. My father was a duke of the Holy Chris Empire and had his own fief. I was born into privilege, so 996 and 997 could get lost. Even better, according to the laws of this world, illegitimate children had no inheritance rights, and I was a legitimate son through and through, so my position as heir was rock solid. Benefiting from being a transmigrator, I could speak the Empire's common tongue fluently by 7 months old. At 3, my talent for arithmetic stunned the top mathematicians of the duchy, and by 5 I was already able to offer useful suggestions at ducal council meetings. And what about my actual older sister? At that time, she was still playing in the mud in the garden. The name of genius spread throughout the duchy, and my position as heir was practically welded in place. Never had there been such a wonderful opening. But I always felt something was off. I'm just a product of 9 years of compulsory education. Using arithmetic to bluff ancient people is one thing, but how could I be this strong in other areas too? My memory now is absurdly good, not quite photographic, but remembering 70 to 80% after one look is no problem. This was probably the transmigrator's cheat ability. Until one day, while flipping through a general history of the Crothia continent, I saw a passage that made my blood run cold. After the elves departed the Crothia continent as an entire race, the wars among the nations began. This conflict lasted for over 300 years, directly marking the end of the second epoch, while the third epoch gradually stepped onto the stage. Elves. That's a race practically bound to the mysterious side of the world. No matter how you look at it, they don't seem normal. Official history probably wouldn't fabricate a race out of thin air, but then a problem arose. One epoch is 10,000 years. The elves left 2 or 3 10,000 years ago, so having even a few scattered records is already pretty good. That led to another question that puzzled me for a long time. Calculated by epochs, humanity has already developed for 50,000 years, far, far longer than Earth's civilization. So why is the most advanced invention still just the steam engine? If this were Earth, 50,000 years would be enough to charge out of the galaxy several times over. Even though my head was full of question marks, discovering that this world had once had a mysterious side still thrilled me immensely. Being a duke who just loafed around and waited to die would certainly be pleasant, but this world was simply too boring. I tucked a book under my arm, hummed an unknown little tune, and strode forward with an outrageously swaggering gait. Just then, I heard someone call by my ear, "Little Eros. Have you seen your sister?" Eros is my name, full name Eros Rinkenumbers. The woman before me, with her platinum blonde long hair, wearing a fluffy white long dress and possessing delicate, pretty features, was my mother in this life, Lady Estelle. I shook my head. I was reading in my room earlier. My sister didn't come to see me today. Estelle bent down and kissed my forehead, praising me. My little Eros is so well behaved, unlike your sister. Mr. Barocca said Wendini skipped class again today, and who knows where she ran off to. Putting on an adult-like manner, I said, older sister is still young. It's normal for her not to like studying. Once she reaches my age, she won't be like this anymore. Estelle looked at me with a strange expression. She was probably thinking, just how old are you yourself? Your sister is 2 years older than you. Half laughing and half crying, she patted my head and went off to keep looking. watching my mother's tall, beautiful figure recede into the distance. I truly couldn't understand it. No matter what angle you looked at her from, she was stunningly beautiful, yet father always liked fooling around with other women outside. I really couldn't make sense of it. I continued toward the library, but before I had gone far, a dark figure sprang out of the flower bed and knocked me over. The one sitting on my waist was Wendini. She had quite a few leaves stuck to her, clearly having hidden in the flower bed to avoid being found. She glared at me viciously, her tone extremely fierce. "Tell me, was it you who told Mom yesterday that I broke the flower arrangement she had carefully trimmed? That got me punished with standing for an hour." Although her expression was fierce, she had perfectly inherited our mother's looks, so even this vicious face still looked incredibly cute. Not to mention the soft, adorable quality in her voice. It made you want to reach out and squeeze her cheeks. Such a cute blonde loli, and my sister too. Who could resist teasing her? So I said with complete confidence, "That's right, it was me. Wasn't it you who smashed it?" Wendini got even angrier and pulled out a bottle of ink from her pocket, clearly planning to create something on my face. I stopped her with one airy sentence. "If you draw on me, I'll tell Mom that it was you who lost that necklace she couldn't find last time. That was a gift from Grandma, and after it went missing, Mom was sad for a long time." Wendini's expression froze, and the ink in her hand instantly lost its appeal. But looking at me acting so arrogantly beneath her, she trembled with rage, threw the ink bottle aside, and grabbed my shoulders with both hands, shaking me hard. "You damn tattletale." Even while being shaken, I was in quite a good mood. I just love seeing that look on your face when you want revenge on me, but can do absolutely nothing about it. Then Estelle's angry shout came from the distance. "Wendini, get off him right now. How can you bully your little brother?" Wendini instantly switched from fury to terror. She got up and tried to run, but Mother stopped her with a sharp shout, and she drooped her head like a little hen defeated in a fight. "Why didn't you go study today? Mr. Barocca's lessons are so boring." Wendini's voice grew quieter and quieter. "Boring, so you skipped class? Look at your brother. He's 2 years younger than you and has already finished his etiquette lessons. And he's the younger brother. You should be the one setting an example for him." Hearing Mom praise me, Wendini looked over at me, only to meet my gloating expression as I pulled faces at her. Furious, she wanted to pounce over and take revenge, but Mother scolded her into stopping. Estelle asked me with concern whether I was hurt, and I obediently said I was fine. Big sister was just playing with me. Mother looked at her obedient and sensible son, then at her daughter who turned lawless whenever no one was watching, and anger rose in her chest. "Just look at your brother, then look at you." Wendini turned her head away and pretended not to hear, muttering, "Tattletale, just wait and see how I'll deal with you later." Very soon, Mother grabbed her by the back of the collar and carried her away. Watching Mother's slender arm easily lift my sister, whose figure was just beginning to show graceful curves, I was somewhat shocked. But this little episode couldn't stop my enthusiasm for exploring the mysterious side, and I continued toward the library. It was my first time coming to our family's library, and this enormous, exquisite building once again left me shocked by the family's wealth. After all, this was the old society, where technology lagged behind in every respect. Being able to build something like this was simply unbelievable. But well, all of this would be mine in the future. I pushed open the heavy door, unexpectedly easily. The counter, which should have had someone on duty, was empty, and there wasn't a single servant in sight, so I could only search through the rows of bookshelves by myself. And then I saw something ridiculous. How to attract the attention of noble ladies, how to get along with noble ladies, how to grasp the hearts of noble ladies. What kind of nonsense was this? After wandering around for quite a while, I still couldn't find any history books. But I did discover quite a few novels, most of them knight biographies. I casually pulled out a few and flipped through them. Basically, all of them had plots where a knight saves a princess, only for the princess to marry a prince, while the knight still remains steadfastly by her side as her guardian. What kind of simp is this? Just looking at it made me mad. If I kept reading, I was afraid even a stroke wouldn't be enough to suppress it. However, the book The Treasure of Pirate King Sally gave me an unexpected surprise. The preface actually contained an introduction to the seas surrounding the continent, something I hadn't known before. My family's territory lies deep inland, extremely far from the sea, and no one had ever told me about maritime affairs. The book described a startling fact. After sailing 500 kilometers outward, all seas eventually connect to the same body of water, the Sea of Mist. The book's description of the Sea of Mist immediately lifted my spirits. It is shrouded in mist all year round, and any living being that enters its range will lose its way. fewer than 1 in 100 return alive. Over the past 10,000 years, countless talented and extraordinary people have tried to conquer that sea, all ending in failure. Therefore, that sea is also known as the God-forsaken sea. 500 kilometers beyond the coastline. The mist never disperses and its range remains constant. This is nothing like a force that nature could produce. This is proof of the mysterious side. And it's so close to humanity. Though excited, I wasn't stupid enough to go verify it myself. With a survival rate of less than 1 in 100, isn't being alive nice enough? Just as I continued looking for books, I vaguely heard voices. Following the sound, I saw two figures. That familiar, brilliant golden short hair and broad back. Wasn't that my father, Duke Lunka? The woman facing my direction saw me and froze, then quickly pushed the man in front of her. Father, however, said carelessly, "Don't worry. I had all the servants leave this morning. No one is allowed near the library today." What person could there be? That said, he still turned around and glanced back. Then he saw his genius son, the pride of the family, the rising star of the duchy, standing there with a puzzled expression. Father froze for a moment, then showed an awkward yet polite smile, nodded at me, and grabbed the woman's hand as he slunk away. No wonder the library was empty. Everyone had been driven off. This old man really has no sense. Is the library a place for fooling around? He made me look for books myself. Fortunately, this nearby section happened to be exactly what I was after, and rows of shelves were plainly lined with historical documents. I couldn't help wearing a strange expression. They weren't planning to desecrate history here, were they? Quite the imagination. Shaking my head to clear away the stray thoughts, I began looking for books that recorded events from the previous epochs. I quickly noticed a pattern. The farther outward the bookshelves were, the closer the books placed on them were to the present era. I walked straight to the innermost section and immediately saw the book I wanted, Chronicle of the Sea of Mist. In no time, I climbed up the shelf and took down the thick book. As for dirtying the shelf and the books by stepping on them, forget dirtying them. Even if I climbed up there and did a handstand while taking a dump, no one would dare say anything. There wasn't a speck of dust on the ancient cover. This library must hold millions of books, and every single one was wiped spotless. The manpower and resources required were simply terrifying. Good thing I was the one doing the bullying. I opened the black-gray cover, and the dark yellow pages were densely covered in writing. Because of its age, the ink had already faded, but after reading just the first paragraph, I knew I had found the right book. What it recorded was the detailed course of that great war after the elves left. After the elves departed, the pent-up grudges between the two most powerful empires on the continent could no longer be contained, and war broke out. This war dragged the entire continent into it. Everywhere was filled with smoke, and people were dying everywhere. No one cremated the bodies of the war dead. They were simply thrown into the great river, in the hope that the current would carry them into the sea to feed the fish. But there were simply too many dead, and the blood from the corpses dyed the entire river red. The red river water flowed with the current into the sea, setting off wave after wave of crimson tides. The war lasted 300 years, and the red tides kept seeping into the deep sea. In the 300th year of the war, patches of mist began to rise over the sea. At first it drew little attention, but it spread extremely quickly. In less than a year, the entire sea was shrouded in mist, and all humans who entered the mist vanished without exception, with neither living people nor dead bodies to be found. Even more terrifying, the mist was still spreading toward the land, and all coastal towns lost contact overnight. People were panic-stricken. No one knew where the mist had come from, nor whether it would stop spreading. Apocalyptic prophecies emerged one after another, and the war was forced to pause. Just when everyone was living in constant dread, the mist suddenly receded. Just as inexplicably as it had appeared, it retreated just as inexplicably. In the end, it stopped 500 kilometers beyond the coastline, and the lands that had once been covered by the mist had become completely silent after it withdrew. All living beings had vanished without a trace. The fear brought by that great fog was deeply branded into the minds of every survivor. The first day the mist came ashore marked the end of the second epoch and the beginning of the third epoch, the epoch of the Sea of Mist. Eros was reading with complete absorption when he was suddenly enveloped by a tall shadow. Startled, he turned his head, only to find his old man standing behind him, with that somewhat familiar woman following behind. Seeing Eros looking at her, the woman showed a faint smile and gave him a curtsy. "Greetings, Your Highness Eros." Duke Lunka seemed a little embarrassed and pointed at the woman as he introduced her. "Lady Florica, you've met her before, your fifth elder sister's mother." Eros nodded. No wonder she looked somewhat familiar. Still, though she was the birth mother of his half-sister, they truly had not met many times. After all, a mistress had low status and was not permitted to dine at the same table as the master's family. Moreover, regarding his old man's mistresses, although his mother never said anything, his old man wasn't so out of his mind as to let them wander around in front of his lawful wife every day. Therefore, those women lived and ate in another courtyard, far from the one where he lived. After all, the ducal residence was quite large, and he still hadn't finished exploring it to this day. Duke Lunka looked at his son with some curiosity and asked, "What are you reading?" Eros reached out and closed the book's cover, revealing the 4 gold-lettered characters on it. Chronicle of the Sea of Mist. Duke Lunka was somewhat surprised. "I didn't expect you to like this sort of thing." Eros shook his head. "I originally wanted to find some records about the elves, but I happened to come across the Sea of Mist just now, so I became a little curious about it as well. So I picked up this book to take a look." Duke Lunka looked puzzled. "The elves haven't appeared on the Crotia continent for tens of thousands of years. Why are you looking for records about them?" Eros was both surprised and delighted. He hadn't expected his old man to actually know something, so he immediately pressed on. "Old man, you know about the elves? Isn't that obvious? Our ancestors even intermarried with the elves back then. So strictly speaking, we also have some elven blood in our bodies. It's just that too much time has passed, and with the continuous dilution generation after generation, this part of the bloodline has probably already become so thin as to be negligible. So that's it." Eros was a bit dumbfounded. He had originally thought he would have to go through all sorts of hardships and maneuvers, and only by some lucky chance obtain a few fragmentary clues, then follow those tiny leads step by step to uncover the long-lost mysterious side. Good grief. And this was it. After all that searching, it turned out my own family was the biggest clue. He no longer hesitated and continued asking, "Then do the elves have some abilities different from ordinary people? Like being able to use magic or some other abilities? Although I don't know what this magic you're talking about is, the elves are indeed different from ordinary people." Hearing this, Eros's eyes lit up with anticipation. "Like what?" Duke Lunka stroked his chin. "For example, elven women are all especially beautiful." Eros suddenly felt as if he were having a bit of a heart attack. Sure enough, he really shouldn't have placed too much hope in this exceptional old man of his. Duke Lunka smiled and rubbed Eros's head. Then the smile faded from his face as he said seriously, "I know what you want to ask, but this is very dangerous. Even merely knowing about it carries great risk. But since you've already become interested in those things, and as a child of me, Lunka, Ulrich, North, since you want to understand these things, I naturally won't keep hiding them from you any longer. It's just not today. We still need to make preparations, and after you come of age, we will tell you everything." After speaking, Duke Lunka no longer lingered and turned to leave at once. He now had certain things to prepare. As for what he would be doing afterward, did that even need saying? Of course, he was going to continue what had been left unfinished. Seeing him turn and leave, Lady Florica smiled at Eros once more, gave him a curtsy, then turned and followed after him. But Eros was already lost in thought by then and forgot to return the gesture, though it was no big deal. He was feeling a little panicked right now, just knowing that knowledge itself carried enormous risk. Why did that setting feel so much like the old one? Could it be that he really had reincarnated into a world with the old one? No way, no way. After worrying for a while, Eros simply gave up thinking about it. Forget it, no more thinking. Being able to come into contact with the mysterious side was a good thing. After transmigrating for so many years, he could finally see the true face of this world, as long as he waited until he was 18. As for whether the future would be good or bad, wouldn't he have to see it first before saying, "Relax, relax"? That night, beneath the high-hanging stars and moon, Aster gently set the sleeping Eros from her arms down to one side and tucked the blanket over him. Looking at her youngest son sleeping so peacefully, she let out a soft sigh. The gentleness and elegance from before had already vanished, replaced entirely by worry on her face. Duke Linka had already told her about Eros's interest in the mysterious side, and that was precisely the root of her present concern. Because, generally speaking, only when a child reached 18 and their mind began to mature would their elders gradually tell them about the twisted, bizarre, and evil things hidden beneath the civilized world. This was because children who were too young had incomplete minds and were far too easily eroded by those bizarre things, causing uncontrollable grotesque mutations in their bodies. Although she also knew that her child was cleverer and more mature than other children, so much so that he hardly seemed like a child at all, that still could not ease her anxious heart. But what else could she do? From the moment Eros began to take an interest in the mysterious, he had already been noticed by it. She softly murmured that truth, stained red by countless streams of blood within the mysterious side. When you peer into the mysterious is also peering into you. When you come into contact with the mysterious will draw closer to you. With another sigh, she bent down and gently kissed Eros on the forehead. I'm sorry, my child, for strangling your curiosity about the real world. Now that things had come to this, in order to keep her child from being contaminated by the mysterious, she could only choose to conceal his curiosity about the real world, to conceal that portion of memories that had already sensed the truth. As her words fell, within a certain grand, solemn, and stately temple, an abstruse and mysterious pitch-black book gave a slight tremble. A force from the source of concealment descended from the night sky and sank into the sleeping child on the bed. And Eros knew nothing of any of this. At that moment, he was immersed in his sweet dreams. Early the next morning, Eros had his blanket yanked off by Wendini. He abruptly opened his eyes and saw that pesky little sister holding the blanket in her hand with a look of successful revenge on her face, while Aster, who had originally been sleeping beside him, was already nowhere to be seen. Eros looked at Wendini helplessly. Pesky little sister, what are you doing? Wendini lifted her little face, full of pride. You're already so old, and you still need mommy to hold you while you sleep. How embarrassing. Eros curled his lip, his face full of disdain. You're just a pesky little sister. What do you know? Call me big brother. Pesky little sister, call me big brother, call me big brother. Pesky little sister, pesky little sister, pesky little sister. Hearing the commotion in the room, the two maids standing outside the door knew that their young master was awake. They immediately opened the door. One went to the bedside to help Eros get dressed, while the other went to prepare the washing supplies. They were long used to this scene of the siblings bickering the moment they met, so they merely covered their mouths and chuckled. And as for the maid service, Eros had already grown accustomed to it by now. This evil old society had already corrupted him. He had wanted to hold out, but the maid young ladies were just too wonderful, so he had fallen completely. Meanwhile, Wendini, watching from the side, once again lifted her little face proudly. I learned to dress myself a long time ago. Wow, big sister Wendini is amazing. You can actually dress yourself. Eros very tactfully played along for once. Wendini's little face flushed a bit red, and she gave a couple of embarrassed huffs. The anger she had felt earlier because her little brother refused to call her big sister had now disappeared completely. Seeing this, the two maids only covered their mouths and laughed quietly. Her Highness Wendini was completely wrapped around her younger brother's finger. After getting himself cleaned up, Eros stood in the courtyard feeling utterly refreshed. Looking at the bright and sunny world, he took a deep breath. What a wonderful world. The life of a great landlord was just this simple and unadorned. Praise be to transmigration. And so the years passed one by one. During that time, he also noticed something strange. After Wendini, that pesky little sister, turned 18, she seemed to disappear for a few days. And after coming back, she became all mysterious and secretive. When he asked her, she wouldn't say a thing and only lifted her little face with a smug smile. Then during that period, his old man also inexplicably handed out a round of rewards to the household servants, saying he was in a very good mood that day. The amount of the reward wasn't small either, which made Eros feel that something was odd. It wasn't that he found it strange that his old man was giving out rewards. Rather, the day the rewards were given just happened to be the day the missing Wendini returned. He definitely didn't believe there was no connection between the two. Strange. It always felt like something was off somewhere, but he just couldn't remember it. Faced with a confusion he couldn't sort out, Eros could only bury it in his heart. 2 years later, on a certain day after his 18th birthday, a male servant he had never seen before walked up to him, bowed, and said, "Your Highness, the Duke requests your presence." Hearing this, Eros froze on the spot. Those words seemed like a key, unlocking a lock in his mind. Scene after scene of unfamiliar, yet familiar memories began to surface in his mind. These were all his own memories, but for some reason, it was as if he had forgotten them and was only now suddenly recalling them. The scenes in his memory finally stopped at that blurry female voice saying, "I'm sorry, my child, for strangling your curiosity about the real world." Hearing that, Eros finally came back to his senses. As if he had understood something, he raised his head, and then he saw the smiling eyes of that male servant. So it had finally come? So that's how it is. This world really does have mysterious powers, and his own family possessed this kind of power. It was just that before, he had not yet turned 18, and coming into contact with those things had been too dangerous. So they had used some method to make him forget that stretch of memory. And today, perhaps because the time had come, they had let him recover those once-forgotten memories. He had already connected everything together. Without hesitating any longer, he nodded and followed behind the male servant. Very soon, he met his old man. Duke Linka gave a serious nod and said, "Follow me." After saying that, he turned and led the way ahead. The corners of Eiros's lips lifted, and without the slightest hesitation, he stepped forward and followed. At last, he was about to come into contact with the truth of this world. One in front and one behind. The two arrived at the small chapel within the ducal estate. Eiros knew this place, since he had often come here before. Inside this chapel was enshrined a statue of the god of death and reincarnation. It seemed that his elders were all believers in him. Originally, he had thought that the gods worshipped by these religions were just like those on earth, fabricated. But now, since the mysterious side truly existed, wasn't it perfectly reasonable that gods truly existed as well? What surprised him a little was that his old man did not enter the main hall of the chapel, but instead walked toward the chapel's back door. After going through the back door and turning a corner, they arrived at the entrance to the basement storeroom of the chapel and stopped. Duke Linka turned around and said to Eiros with an exceptionally solemn expression, "In a moment, no matter what you see, you are not to shout. Keep reverence in your heart, because where we are about to go is the hall of our ancestors, the hall of a great one." By the end, Duke Linka was even somewhat agitated, and his tone had involuntarily risen quite a bit. Perhaps sensing the seriousness in Duke Linka's voice, Eiros also couldn't help but straighten his back, his expression turning solemn as well. Seeing his son's appearance at this moment, Duke Linka nodded and stopped hesitating. He walked down the steps and finally stopped at the wall directly facing the basement staircase. He raised his right hand and chanted an incomprehensible spell under his breath. A murky gray light gathered in his palm, and he slapped the wall with his hand. In an instant, the entire wall, built from expensive stone, turned pitch black. Eiros's pupils suddenly contracted because he saw his father walking toward that darkness, black as if it could swallow all light and then disappear into it. Although there were 10,000 what the hells in his heart, he still remembered his father's words and did not cry out in alarm. Taking a deep breath, he no longer hesitated and also walked toward that black wall. After entering it, he stared at the long corridor before him with some curiosity, then immediately looked up at his father. And Duke Linka did not disappoint him. He said, "This is the shadow realm, the world's shadow. Our ancestor cut out a section of the world's shadow and, through alchemy, refined it into a special world." Eiros opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. Shadows could be cut out? And the world's shadow at that? What disappointed him a little was that this time his father had no intention of explaining further. Instead, he kept walking forward along the corridor without stopping. After turning past several forks in the path, he finally stopped before a black door carved with mysterious patterns. Duke Linka reached out and pushed open the door, then turned back to signal Eiros behind him to follow. The door slowly closed, and Eiros curiously looked around the room. The room was large, but there were not many things inside. Only a table, several chairs, and the largest object, a bookshelf placed against the corner of the wall. Just as he was about to see what books were on the shelf, he discovered that the titles of those books had suddenly turned into bizarre, twisted tentacles, writhing continuously. Along with that came waves of chilling whispers sounding by his ears. Eiros swallowed and barely managed not to scream, and at that moment, a light cough came from beside him. In an instant, the whispers that had been sounding in his ears immediately vanished. Looking at the bookshelf again, books of various colors were neatly arranged upon it, as if those bizarre, twisted tentacles from just now had only been his illusion. Eiros was certain that he had neither seen nor heard wrong just now. But what was going on now? He looked up at his father, hoping he could explain it to him. Duke Linka cleared his throat. "You did not see wrong just now, nor did you hear wrong. These are exactly what I am about to tell you about, those forbidden pieces of knowledge hidden beneath civilization." As his father explained sentence by sentence, Eiros gradually gained a general understanding of the mysterious side of this world. Sure enough, gods really did exist in this world, and there was more than one. The 9 great churches that had dominated the Crotia continent for several epochs each worshipped gods that truly existed. They styled themselves as righteous gods, sitting high upon the thrones of heaven and looking down upon the nations of the mortal world. Besides them, there were also quite a few gods of smaller churches who truly existed. It was just that their status was inferior to those 9 righteous gods. Sometimes they were even called false gods by members of the 9 great churches, and their followers would be purged as heretics, living in extremely miserable circumstances. But the more he listened, the more Eros felt that something was off. His father seemed to hold those righteous gods in extreme contempt. One could even say hostility, which made him rather puzzled. Wasn't his family devout followers of the god of death and reincarnation? Not only did they donate a huge amount of wealth to the church every year, they also held sacrificial ceremonies during certain festivals to praise the deity. Could it be that all of that was just for show? At once, he carefully chose his words and said, "Father, it seems like you don't respect those gods very much." How could he not be curious? After all, in this world where imperial power was divinely granted, if one was discovered to be disrespectful toward those righteous gods, one would be arrested and thoroughly educated, let alone openly hostile to them. Hearing Eros's question, Duke Linka said with some sarcasm, "They are nothing more than a bunch of traitors, yet they still call themselves righteous gods." Eros immediately seized on the key point. Traitors? Why do you call them traitors? Whom did they betray? Our ancestor, the goddess of night, was once their companion, and 2 of them had even once been her students. But they betrayed our ancestor, used some filthy conspiracies and schemes to kill her, and devoured her origin. That was how they became the most powerful gods in this world. However, our ancestor was, after all, one of the great ones, and would not be so easily killed completely. Before dying, she left behind a prophecy, saying that she would eventually return. After those traitors learned of this prophecy, they became afraid, so they slandered our ancestor as an evil god, and they madly slaughtered our ancestor's followers and bloodline, attempting to erase her faith in order to completely prevent her return. At this point, Duke Linka's tone shifted from anger to heaviness, while Eros was already stunned. Duke Linka restrained his emotions a little and continued, "For tens of thousands of years, we have hidden here and there. The bloodline that was once the most exalted and noble in this world is now called the remnants of the night, reduced to being like rats crossing the street." Eros felt sweat forming on his forehead. So from the very start, he was already enemies with the 9 most powerful forces in this world? Tens of thousands of years of slaughter. This hatred was absolutely irreconcilable. What kind of hell mode was this? He was a little panicked now. Was it still too late to reincarnate again? Of course, that last sentence was just a joke he made inwardly to amuse himself through the bitterness. As if noticing that his son was secretly wiping away cold sweat, Duke Linka comforted him. "Don't worry, we're very safe now. 300 years ago, our ancestor made a decision to split the family into 2. One part voluntarily sacrificed themselves in exchange for the other part gaining a chance to join a certain church. Now the plan has proceeded very successfully. Even the 9 great churches probably would never imagine that we would join a church and become one of the family powers under the church. What a brilliant reverse move. It seemed that Ancestor deeply understood that the most dangerous place was the safest place. The church probably never imagined that an enemy with such a deep blood feud would be hiding right under its nose. Not only donating enormous supplies to it every year, but also holding festivals whenever the holidays came around. This was practically a model believer. Still, he was a little curious. Didn't the church have any other ways of searching for people? After all, this was a world of the mysterious side, where even gods truly existed. So how could there not be some strange and unusual abilities for finding people? So he asked this question directly, and Duke Linka quickly gave an explanation. What our ancestor controlled was the authority of secrecy. As long as our bloodline undergoes the baptism, we will definitely awaken an ability called Servant of Secrecy, combined with the divine artifact left behind by our ancestor. As long as we do not expose ourselves on our own initiative, it is very difficult for the church to discover our identities. That is also the reason we have been able to hide for tens of thousands of years. Bloodline baptism? Eros once again seized on the key point. Only after undergoing the baptism can one truly step through the gate into the mysterious side. That is also the purpose of my bringing you here today. This place is the world refined by our ancestor, covered by her authority. Even if one were to speak the true names of those traitors here, they would not notice it, much less a mere baptism. Duke Linka's expression was calm, his tone carrying a slight hint of pride. Will it be enough after the baptism? Duke Linka shook his head and walked out of the room, signaling for him to talk while walking. After the baptism, one can only become Sequence 9, Seeker of Secrets. In the future, if you want to advance to Sequence 8, Listener, or Sequence 7, Light Chaser, you will need to accommodate more spirits yourself. How many sequences are there in total? There are 10 sequences in total, but even the imperial family of the Chris Empire only possesses the advancement methods from sequence 9 to sequence 4. As for the remaining nobles, their upper limit is sequence 5. Apart from those churches that have gods, the only ones who possess a complete advancement pathway are us. Well then, isn't this like a rat crossing the street clutching a gold brick? He felt his future looked even bleaker. But on second thought, since his family had endured for tens of thousands of years, they surely must have high sequences as well. So he asked, "Then what is the highest sequence in our family?" The atmosphere suddenly fell silent. Duke Linka, who had just been feeling a little proud that only their family and the churches possessed complete advancement pathways, froze for a moment. After quite a while, he finally said in a muffled voice, "Sequence 5, Firebearer." Eros found it a little hard to believe. A family that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years, a family whose ancestors had even produced a god, had only reached sequence 5 at its peak. Wasn't this completely over? We're doomed. Duke Linka looked somewhat embarrassed, but he still explained, "It's because the bloodline is too ancient. On top of that, over these tens of thousands of years, those high-sequence ancestors often died in battle while covering the escape of lower-sequence clansmen, before they could leave behind offspring with purified bloodlines, creating a vicious cycle. But now things have stabilized, so the clan encourages having more children. If by chance one with good talent appears, the current awkward situation might be changed. Is this quantitative change leading to qualitative change? Still, Eros glanced at his old man. Better that it's the clan encouraging it, and not just you enjoying yourself." Duke Linka didn't notice the distrustful look in his son's eyes and continued, "Another method is to learn from those imperial families and stop intermarrying with outsiders. That way, even if exceptionally talented offspring don't appear, at least the bloodline won't continue to be diluted." Eros looked at his old man in some surprise, and Duke Linka said somewhat helplessly, "This is also a last resort. After all, relying on only a few sequence 5s to support the family is indeed far too dangerous for people like us." Eros nodded. He could understand that. After all, facing the pressure of several of the world's strongest factions, with only a few sequence 5s in his own family, if this were exposed, they probably shouldn't expect even one person to escape this time. Along the way, Duke Linka spoke a great deal, and Eros listened to a great deal as well. His understanding of the mysterious side gradually became more complete, and in the end they stopped before an ancient, austere, solemn church. Walking ahead, Duke Linka pushed open the heavy door in front of him, which had been left slightly ajar. A gentle halo of light spread outward from the hall. Quite a few people were standing inside at the moment, most of them elderly men with graying hair and white beards. Some Eros recognized, and some he did not. Aistel was also among the crowd. When she saw him arrive, she gave him an encouraging smile, her gaze as clear and gentle as water. After looking at the people, Eros noticed the statue at the very top of the hall, emanating mystery, majesty, and solemnity. He had a realization in his heart. That should be the ancestral statue, right? Beside him, Duke Linka, who had already spoken with those elders, beckoned to Eros, signaling for him to come over. Then he led him to the front of the statue, first offering a solemn prayer with a grave expression, and then had Eros kneel on one knee in the center of the floor engraved with mysterious symbols and patterns. He nodded to the elders at the side who had long been prepared, his tone solemn and serious. "Prepare to begin the bloodline baptism ritual." As his words fell, those elders took out piece after piece of milky white spirit marrow that had already been prepared. Following the mysterious patterns winding across the floor, they placed them down in an orderly fashion. As they set them down one by one, the mysterious symbols inscribed on the floor also lit up one after another. Taking advantage of the time they still had, Duke Linka began explaining the things he needed to pay attention to next. There wasn't much to note. Basically, because this was the ancestors' world, this baptism would involve no danger whatsoever. He only needed to follow the path that would soon appear before his eyes and go as far as he possibly could. The farther he walked, the better. After understanding what was meant, Eros nodded, indicating that he understood. After that, he quietly knelt where he was, lowered his head, and silently waited for what would happen next. Time passed second by second. At first, Eros didn't feel much. But gradually, he felt a warm current clinging tightly to his skin, seeping into his body through every limb and bone. This warm and comfortable sensation made him drowsy, his eyelids drooping uncontrollably before slowly closing. Suddenly, Eros jolted awake. He remembered that he was still undergoing the baptism and absolutely couldn't fall asleep. He forced himself to stay alert, only to abruptly discover that he was in an unfamiliar place. Looking up, he saw that everything around him was shrouded in mist, and he couldn't tell where he was. The elders who had originally been standing not far away waiting for the result had all disappeared now, leaving only himself standing here alone. Has the baptism process already begun? But where's the path? Didn't my old man say a path would appear before my eyes? He looked at the misty space before him with some astonishment and confusion. Outside, the clan elders not far away watched Eros, who had already closed his eyes and entered bloodline regression, and gradually began speaking in low voices. They were all very optimistic about this child, who had shown exceptional intelligence since childhood. They believed his warlock talent should be the best seen in recent years. They just didn't know which ancestor's imprint engraved in the bloodline he would see. An elderly man with a monocle, his white hair combed meticulously, slowly said, "In my opinion, little Eros should at least be able to see the bloodline imprint left by an ancestor 5,000 years ago." Everyone who heard this was somewhat shocked, because 5,000 years ago, there were still wanderers in the family. That was in existence at Sequence 2, a mythological life form that had surpassed the limits of mortals and entered the mythical domain. Did he mean that little Eros had the talent to become a mythological life form? Although they also thought highly of little Eros, could the bloodline, now already filthy beyond measure, really give birth to a mythological bloodline? They asked themselves honestly, and this was almost impossible. Even in what they considered the most ideal scenario, it would still require the efforts of several generations, continuously purifying the bloodline until it was sufficient to support the birth of a mythological bloodline. But that would take quite a considerable amount of time, and it would also require every generation to produce children with sufficiently good talent. Yet the words spoken by the man before them were such that they could not ignore them, for the white-haired elder was one of the highest-ranking seniors present. Not to mention that he was also one of the only 3 remaining Sequence 5s in the family. They believed this elder would not speak without grounds, so? For a moment, they all grew excited. How many years had it been? How many years had it been since the family last produced a mythological life form? Although having a mythological bloodline did not necessarily mean one would certainly become a mythological life form, they were not overly concerned about that. For others, it might be impossible. But for a family like theirs, with 10,000 years of accumulation, it might not be impossible. Although 10,000 years of hiding and fleeing had consumed most of that accumulation, even relying only on what remained, as long as the person did not die and their talent could support it, they could pile resources on until they succeeded. Although a single mythological life form alone could not improve the family's current situation, it could at least let them feel somewhat more at ease. After all, if they were exposed now, probably not a single member of the entire family would escape. But with a mythological life form present, at least 1 or 2 might still get out, and the family's bloodline would not be completely severed. At this moment, Duke Lenka was so delighted he could hardly stop smiling. His own child's talent made him proud as well. Aistel was not grinning from ear to ear like her husband, but a faint smile still hung on her face, clearly showing that she was also very happy. As more and more time passed, the milky white spirit marrow placed on the mysterious symbols according to a pattern was replaced batch after batch. But no one present showed the slightest impatience. Instead, they became more and more excited, more and more agitated. Those milky white spirit marrows were spirit that had already condensed into solid form, and spirit was the energy needed to activate the ritual array. The more spirit was consumed, the farther it meant the person in the ritual had walked on the path of bloodline regression. And the farther one walked, the closer one would be to the source of the bloodline. At this moment, another white-haired elder, his eyes brimming with tears and his lips trembling, said, "The spirit being consumed is already more than 100 times what it was in my day. It really is a mythological bloodline. Good, good, good." At this moment, Eros was staring blankly at the gray fog-filled world before him. He had already run quite a long way, yet he still hadn't seen the path his old man mentioned. Where was his path? Where was it? Wasn't there supposed to be a path appearing? Did it bug out? What am I supposed to do next? Keep going forward? Forget it. Anyway, didn't Dad say to go as far as possible? Even though he hadn't seen that path, he should still try to go as far as he could. And so, he kept moving forward through that gray fog in a random direction. When he got tired from running, he stopped to rest for a while, then kept running. Little by little, time passed. He had no idea how long he had been running, nor how far he had gone, since this damned place didn't even have a single landmark. Front, back, left, and right all looked exactly the same. He didn't even know whether he was running in a straight line. But just then, he suddenly noticed a small point of light appearing ahead, which gave him a jolt of energy. At last, he had seen something other than gray fog. This made him a little excited, and he immediately hurried toward that point of light. When he got closer, he realized it was a pale green ball of light floating in midair and radiating a soft glow, only about the size of a fist. To his surprise, after being enveloped by the halo emitted by that pale green ball of light, he felt completely refreshed, and the fatigue from running vanished without a trace. Could this be the bloodline mark Dad mentioned? Eros extended his index finger, wanting to poke that pale green ball of light. But just as his finger touched the orb, his vision blurred. When he could see clearly again, he found himself in midair, falling freely toward the sea below, and he couldn't help crying out in alarm. But in the very next instant, a vine that appeared out of nowhere wrapped around his waist and pulled him in one direction. When he came back to his senses, a woman appeared before him, wearing a flower crown and a light green, elegant dress. Eros stared at this woman in a daze. He felt his heart pounding wildly. Heaven! This woman was way too perfectly his type. In just an instant, a line he had seen in his previous life came to mind. Lovely as the peach blossoms of spring, pure as the chrysanthemums of late autumn. Wasn't that describing her exactly? Not to mention that she also had a head of smooth white hair. White hair. Absolutely top tier, okay. The beautiful goddess looked at the child before her with a trace of astonishment on her face. She did not understand how this child had suddenly appeared, nor did she understand why. Despite being merely a mortal, he could look directly at her without suffering any effects. She stared at the child and took a careful look, and a hint of understanding instantly arose in her heart. So that's how it is? Meanwhile, Eros, who had still been staring blankly, was jolted awake by bursts of eerie laughter. He immediately glanced toward where the laughter was coming from and was so startled that he reflexively shouted, "WC." It was simply because the thing before him was way too horrifying. A huge lump of flesh that was hard to describe, with one enormous eye growing on it, and around that eye were densely packed writhing tentacles. And that thing seemed to have noticed him. Its huge pupils stared fixedly at him. Then, as if it had discovered something interesting, eyes began appearing one after another on its exposed skin and on its tentacles. In the end, its entire body was covered in eyes, all of them staring fixedly at him, while it kept making eerie giggling sounds of hee hee, hee hee. Eros's scalp went numb. Looking at the densely packed eyes, he felt physically uncomfortable. If someone with trypophobia saw this scene instead, wouldn't they probably just die on the spot? He immediately turned his head away and stopped looking at that thing. It was simply too physically disturbing. Although he had no idea how he had appeared here. It looked like these two sides were in a standoff, except he had suddenly appeared and barged in. Luckily, he had appeared closer to this beautiful big sister. Otherwise, wouldn't he be totally done for? Suddenly, he seemed to realize something. Wasn't he undergoing the bloodline baptism ritual? According to what his old man had told him, bloodline baptism was about tracing back to the source of one's bloodline, and along the way, one would encounter many marks left in the bloodline by one's ancestors. And what he needed to do was choose the more powerful ancestors as much as possible, then awaken their bloodline. So here was the question. Was this woman in front of him his ancestor? I finally fell for someone once, and you made me lose so completely? Now that Cecilia had already understood this child's origin and purpose, she had no mind to continue tangling with that bizarre and twisted thing opposite her. After glancing at it, she vanished from where she stood, and Eros, who was being supported by vines at her side, disappeared with her. Thus, only that bizarre and twisted thing remained over the empty sea. After Eros disappeared, it turned its gaze toward the spot where Eros had suddenly appeared just moments ago. Without any visible movement from it, that patch of space suddenly sprouted densely packed tentacles out of thin air, and eyeballs continuously squeezed out from gaps in the flesh on those tentacles. Countless eyeballs completely filled that stretch of space, and then abruptly disappeared. Accompanied by eerie low laughter, it slowly sank below the sea's surface and gradually vanished. And on the other side, Eros again felt his vision blur, and then he found himself in an unfamiliar place. Sigh. Again, this abrupt scene change. He felt like he was almost getting used to it. Suddenly, a soft and melodious chuckle interrupted his thoughts. I never thought you would choose to awaken the bloodline of my elf race. Since that's the case, then I shall personally perform the baptism for you. Get ready, little Alicia. Eros was a little stunned. Only then did he notice the inhuman ears hidden beneath the flower crown of the gentle white-haired big sister before him. They were somewhat different from normal human ears. Hers were slightly pointed and slender. She was an elf? Eros suddenly remembered that day in the library, when his old man had told him that one of their ancestors had once intermarried with the elf race. In other words, was the woman before him really a mark engraved in his bloodline by his ancestor? Then what about that tentacle monster? Could it be one too? But are bloodline marks supposed to look like that? And who is Alicia? What does she mean by calling him Alicia? Even though he really is good-looking in this life, it's not to the point that people can't tell his gender. Eros's mind was now full of questions. Just as he was about to speak and ask, a fair and slender finger gently touched the center of his brow, and then his vision blurred again. Once, twice, thrice, and again, another scene change. Only this time, he had returned to the gray fog space from the very beginning. Cecilia looked at the child who had abruptly disappeared before her and was slightly taken aback. Then she shook her head and chuckled softly. So it was because the power wasn't enough? Without hesitating further, her gaze followed the river of bloodline all the way downstream, finally locking onto the child sitting at the center of the ritual array. Her slender, graceful finger applied slight force, cutting a wound on the soft white pad of her fingertip. Looking at the crimson blood seeping out of the wound, she pointed with one finger. That finger seemed to cross time and space, directly touching the center of Eros's brow from the very source of the bloodline all the way at the far downstream end. Shadow Realm, Temple Hall. The elders who were still waiting for the result of the ritual all changed expression drastically when they saw Eros suddenly disappear before them. A few of the more impatient ones immediately moved forward to check what had happened. At that very moment, the silver-white moon wheel behind the ancestor statue at the front of the hall, originally only used as decoration, suddenly lit up faintly and let out a soft humming sound. Those elders who were about to enter the range of the array had not yet understood what was happening before they were pushed back to where they had been by an irresistible force. Estelle felt herself being pushed back. She immediately tried to move forward again, but Duke Linka beside her pulled her back. Duke Linka shook his head and said softly, "Since that great being has acted to stop us from approaching, then there probably won't be any danger." After saying that, he secretly gestured to Estelle toward the silver-white moon wheel, which had returned to looking plain and unremarkable. Estelle's worried heart eased slightly, since she also knew the origin of that silver-white moon wheel. That was a divine artifact forged by the ancestor, so it shouldn't harm the descendants of its owner. Someone beside them also tried to reassure everyone. The formation is still operating, and besides, we're inside the ancestor's temple right now, so nothing will happen. As if in response to his words, Eros, who had suddenly vanished, abruptly reappeared in the same spot, making everyone present breathe a sigh of relief. Although they knew nothing would happen, not seeing him still left them feeling uneasy. But before they could fully relax, in the next instant, it was as if the heavens were collapsing. An indescribable aura descended from the sky above, making the space-time of the entire Shadow Realm seem to freeze. Everyone present felt their whole bodies tremble and found it hard to breathe, as if something had fiercely gripped their hearts. Just then, the silver-white moon wheel, which had returned to looking plain and ordinary, suddenly shone brilliantly, shielding everyone from that terrifying, trembling-inducing aura. Once the aura was cut off, they could no longer hold on, and all collapsed limply to the ground, gasping for breath. Suddenly, someone cried out in shock. "What is that?" Everyone looked in the direction the person was pointing, and to their astonishment discovered a finger, so blurry that it was impossible to see clearly, pressing against Eros's glabella out of thin air. Then the phantom of an ancient tree with luxuriant branches and leaves suddenly appeared behind him as well. Along with it came an aura full of vitality, continuously emanating from the ancient tree's phantom and spreading outward. When that life-filled aura enveloped them, they discovered that all the discomfort that had appeared earlier had now vanished without a trace, replaced instead by incomparable relaxation and comfort. Several elders even found in surprise that the chronic hidden injuries left on their bodies from wounds suffered in their youth were gradually recovering. Someone recognized the ancient tree phantom behind Eros and exclaimed in utter disbelief, "The World Tree. This is actually the World Tree. Then that aura just now. Could it have been that great one of the elf race? It actually personally conducted the ritual for little Eros." The people nearby who heard this were likewise filled with shock and disbelief. But soon they were overjoyed, so excited that tears welled in their eyes. To receive a personal baptism from a great one, what kind of talent must that be? The ancestor has shown mercy. There is hope for the rise of our clan. Meanwhile, an old man with a white beard muttered, somewhat puzzled. So our clan really does have elven bloodline after all. When Duke Lenka heard this, he spoke in astonishment. "Uncle, wasn't it you who told me back then that our clan's ancestor had once intermarried with the elves?" The white-bearded old man looked a little embarrassed. "Your great-grandfather told me that when I was little. I always thought it was just boasting. After all, there was no exact record in the clan of which ancestor had married into the elf race." Duke Lenka was somewhat speechless. "So you used something you didn't even believe yourself to fool me?" Seeming to guess what his nephew was thinking, the white-bearded old man awkwardly scratched his head. "Now it seems it should be true, though it's still a bit hard to believe." Little Eros actually attracted that great one's attention during the bloodline tracing and was even worthy of having it personally baptize him. Indeed, even though Duke Lenka had high expectations for his son, seeing this scene still felt a little unbelievable to him. Good thing he wasn't from Earth. Otherwise he would definitely have shouted, "This isn't scientific." After all, that was a great one. A deity seated high in the heavenly kingdom, lowering its gaze to overlook the mortal world. After a long while, once the ancient tree phantom behind Eros had completely solidified, that finger slowly left his glabella, inch by inch sinking into the void before disappearing. Just as everyone thought the ritual was about to end, they discovered that the formation was still operating, which meant the ritual was still continuing. However, Eros knew nothing of what was happening outside. At this moment, he was wandering around the gray mist space in utter boredom. There wasn't really anything to see anyway. There was nothing but gray mist. Suddenly, a pale golden ball of light appeared out of thin air before his eyes. Along with it, a passage of text appeared in his mind. After reading it, Eros looked at the pale golden light sphere before him in surprise. This is a spell technique comprehended from the bloodline? By his own understanding, this was basically his skill? But he hadn't done anything at all. So how had he comprehended it? Whatever, he'd better first take a look at what this skill called Divine Art, Chapter of Life actually did. He immediately reached out to touch the pale golden ball of light. The moment he touched it, the sphere turned into a streak of light and flew straight out from his palm into his brain. In the next moment, a huge amount of spell knowledge surged into his mind, and he understood a little. So this ball of light outside was basically a compressed package, and inside it were a whole bunch of files. What puzzled him, though, was why these were all healing and buffing skills. Was this trying to make him become a healer? Suddenly he understood a little. Why there was that line in the knowledge brought by the Divine Art, Chapter of Life. Life shall be engraved upon your fingertips. Wasn't it literally engraved on his fingertips? Dozens of skills, all for healing people and adding buffs. But he wanted to be DPS. A healer who doesn't want to be DPS is not a good healer. As if the deity had responded to his inner thoughts, another pale golden ball of light appeared before him at this moment. Divine Art, Judgment of Life. Eros's eyes lit up. Just from the name, he knew this had to be a DPS skill. And after the light sphere entered his mind and decompressed, the dozens of skills that appeared were indeed all damage-dealing skills. Only then did he nod with some satisfaction. After all, what kind of DPS is a DPS that can't heal? Another ball of light then appeared, but unfortunately this one was a passive skill, Divine Art, Nature's Protection. But after reading the effect of this skill, he was somewhat shocked. This passive was way too strong, wasn't it? It basically meant that as long as he was outdoors, he could gain an all attributes boost. This is great. That way, when I go farming in the wild in the future, I'll directly have one extra permanent buff on me. Love it, love it. Is Elven bloodline really this strong? I'm absolutely blown away. But the next light sphere that appeared surprised him, not only because its color was pitch black, but also because of the skill it carried. Divine Art, Eternal Night Judgment. After all, he had thought that since he had awakened Elven bloodline, the skills he comprehended should all be of the elf race. But now it seemed that wasn't the case. To that, he could only say that being mixed blood was just too great. Looking at the additional skills in his mind, Eros nodded in satisfaction once again. He was getting closer and closer to becoming an all-round hexagonal warrior. Just like the Elven bloodline, the Night bloodline also had only 3 light spheres. Of the remaining 2 light spheres, one was the Servant of Secrets that he had heard about from his old man, while the other was called Divine Art, Protection of Night. Both were passive skills. The effect of this Divine Art, Protection of Night, was just as overpowered as Divine Art, Nature's Protection. As long as the time is nighttime, he can gain an all attributes boost. Doesn't that mean that in the future, even that aspect of himself can be enhanced at night, and his strongest state would be going into the wild at night? TSK, this skill combination is so perverted. I love it. Right after he received those 6 light spheres, the gray mist in this gray mist space gradually dispersed, and the space slowly overlapped with the temple hall outside. Seeing this, Eros immediately understood that the bloodline baptism was probably about to end. But at that moment, two milky white light spheres suddenly appeared before him and were forcibly stuffed into his mind. In the next second, the space completely overlapped, and Eros, seated in the temple hall, slowly opened his eyes. He shook his somewhat swollen head. Just now, those two milky white light spheres had seemed to be forced in by something, shoved straight into his mind. The feeling was completely different from when he had touched those previous 6 light spheres. After his brain eased up a little, he finally spared some attention to investigate what those 2 light spheres forcibly stuffed into his mind were. They were also 2 skills, with no introduction or explanation whatsoever, only 2 names. Divine Art, Blessing of the Deep Sea. Divine Art, Breath of the Deep Sea. He was somewhat baffled. Where had these 2 skills come from? He had never heard his old man say that their family had any connection to the sea. He suddenly remembered the bizarre giant eyeball he had seen after entering that green orb. Could it be that thing? Thinking of that grotesque creature covered all over in eyeballs made Eros feel a bit psychologically uncomfortable. He immediately shook his head, throwing that image out of his mind, steadied himself, and turned his gaze to the group of elders not far away, their faces full of excitement, agitation, and anticipation, wanting to come closer, yet not daring to. He asked curiously, "The ritual should be over, right? Can I move now?" The group of old men in the distance, all with white hair and beards, let out a sigh of relief after hearing Eros speak. They understood that the Great One had truly left, and at once a whole crowd swarmed over. Among them, one old man with eyes full of affection said excitedly, "Little Eros, how did you do it? You actually managed to have that Great One of the elves personally baptize you." Before he could finish, someone beside him directly shoved him aside, then squeezed up in front of Eros himself, also with a face full of affection. "Little Eros, hurry and tell your granduncle, what does it feel like to be personally baptized by the Great One?" He too was shoved aside by someone else before he could finish. Sure enough, he who pushes others will in turn be pushed. Eros's granduncle, who had been pushed away, was still shouting, "Ryan, why are you pushing me?" The elder named Ryan paid him no mind at all, and likewise leaned in front of Eros with a beaming smile and said, "Little Eros, did that Great One mention when our honored ancestor would return?" Hearing this question, the atmosphere suddenly turned quiet, and everyone looked at Eros with eager eyes. After hearing this string of questions, Eros was a little stunned. He needed to sort out his thoughts first. In other words, that gentle white-haired big sister he had seen was actually a god? He had to force himself not to blurt out WOC. He had just abruptly met one of the beings standing at the very pinnacle of this world. Fortunately, that goddess probably didn't know what he had been thinking at the time. Probably. She didn't know, right? Otherwise, even with elf blood flowing in his veins, he would probably have been strangled to death. But being stared at so eagerly by a bunch of old men with white hair and beards still made even Eros feel a little creeped out deep down. He immediately gave a dry cough, reined in his thoughts, shook his head, and said, "She never said so. I only learned now that she was actually a god." Hearing this, all the old men were somewhat disappointed, but they quickly recovered. After all, they had already endured tens of thousands of years, so they were not afraid of waiting longer. However, they no longer had the same enthusiasm as before for asking all sorts of questions. At once, someone spoke up. "In that case, please, Lord Divine Artifact, conceal little Eros's fate now." Hearing this, everyone nodded and stopped crowding around Eros. One by one, they returned to their original positions, their expressions turning solemn again. Eros, however, felt a little curious and looked around. He immediately spotted his father and Aistel, who had just been squeezed outside the crowd and did not dare push their way in, so he walked over and asked, "Father, Mother, what is this divine artifact my granduncles were talking about?" Duke Linka smiled and explained, "Our ancestor once left 3 powerful divine artifacts to the family. One is the Book of Night, the second is the Moon of Eternal Slumber, and the third is the Eye of Eternal Night. The reason our family has been able to carry on its lineage to this day is precisely because of the help of those 3 divine artifacts. As for your granduncles saying they will conceal your fate, that requires the Book of Night. You only need to record your true name in it, and then not even a Great One will be able to use spells to find your whereabouts." Eros understood somewhat. So this was the divine artifact father had mentioned before, the one used together with the Servant of Secrecy? Not long after, several elders walked in through the side rear doorway of the temple. One of them was also reverently holding up a booklet with a pitch-black cover in his hands. He walked up to Eros and said with a solemn expression and respectful tone, "Lord Artifact Spirit, please conceal this child's fate." As his words fell, the pitch-black booklet being held in his palms suddenly floated up out of thin air. It flew straight in front of Eros and opened, its pages turning on their own without wind, rustling as they flipped to a page that still had a blank space on it. Eros looked at that page and saw that many names had already been written on it. His father's and Aistel's true names were also clearly listed, but what puzzled him was that all the surnames on it were not Noth, but the character Yi. And there wasn't even a pen, so how was he supposed to write his name? Seeming to see his confusion, the elder explained, "Since we had prepared to change our identities and go into hiding, it was naturally impossible for us to keep using our former surname. Noth was the surname our ancestors chose anew back then, but our true surname is still Yi. As for how to record it, just press your finger onto it and speak your true name." Eros suddenly understood and immediately did as instructed. Very soon, a name clearly appeared in the blank space on the page: Eros. Linka. Yi. Just as Eros was about to withdraw his hand, a streak of black light suddenly shot out from the page and went straight into his mind. The people around him, however, seemed completely unsurprised by this scene and showed no reaction at all. As for Eros, he felt that the moment that black light entered his mind, a voice began looping endlessly inside his head, telling him to be loyal to the family, loyal to the bloodline, loyal to the goddess of night, never to defy, never to slacken, never to forget. That voice kept echoing in his mind, gradually sinking deep into his soul, as if it wanted to forcibly imprint those words onto it. And at that very moment, the solemn and mysterious statue of the ancestor directly above the hall gave a slight shake. Then, likewise, a streak of black light shot out from the statue's eyes, flying straight into Eros's mind and shattering that endlessly repeating whisper. It was so fast that it was unbelievable, so much so that no one realized what had happened. After that voice dissipated, Eros only felt his soul suddenly relax, and then he could no longer hold on and fainted on the spot. And his final thought before passing out was that there was a reason the goddess of night was called an evil god. Just this method of forcibly brainwashing people was not something a benevolent deity would do. Seeing Eros faint, the Book of Night, which had originally been open, slowly closed and fell back into that elder's palm. The others looked at Eros, who was now being supported in Aistel's arms, and also found it rather strange. In the past, there had never been a case of someone fainting during the concealment of fate. But after checking and finding his vital signs normal, they were all relieved and concluded that it was probably caused by excessive strain on the soul. After all, his soul had gone through such a long bloodline baptism, so feeling tired was perfectly normal. Supporting Eros, Aistel softly said to the several elders of the clan, "Since everything is already over, I'll take Eros out now and let him get some proper rest." Naturally, no one would refuse this request. One of them said, go on, let the child get some good rest. He's worked hard today. As for us, we still need to discuss how this child should be taught in the future. To possess the talent to be noticed by a great one and personally baptized by them. Just how terrifying must that be? It seems the day our clan rises again is not far off. That day, all the servants in the ducal residence once again received an extra reward for no apparent reason. It was said that the Duke was also very happy today. Great gods above, may the generous Duke be this happy every day. Who knew how much time had passed before Eros slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the familiar gray mist before him, he froze slightly. Wasn't the baptism already over? Why had he appeared here again? Then a tentacle extended out from behind Eros's neck, curved around, and turned the eye at its tip toward him. Eros was so frightened that he shuddered violently, his heart nearly stopping. He sprang to his feet and bolted, not daring to look back at all, afraid that the moment he did he would see that huge eyeball covered in tentacles. What the hell was going on? How had a tentacle from that big eyeball tentacle monster appeared here? He was screaming WC in his heart. By the time he finally could not run anymore, he turned around to see whether that tentacle was still behind him, and then he saw that it was just a short section of tentacle that had grown out of thin air, rather than the enormous main body he had seen before. But even so, it was still terrifying, okay? Even if it was only a small section, it was still as thick as an arm and several times his height in length. Eros braced his hands on his knees and gasped for breath, his eyes fixed firmly on that tentacle. From the current situation, there was no way he could escape, and he also knew this damn thing was not something he, as he was now, could deal with. After all, This was something that could stand against a god. No matter how you looked at it, it was no weakling, okay? Even if it was just one of its tentacles, it was far beyond what someone like him, who had only just come into contact with the mysterious world, could handle. But even a cornered rabbit will bite, and since he couldn't run away right now, he might as well risk his life and fight it out. Screw it. He'd splash its face with blood. He stared fixedly at that segment of tentacle, and that segment of tentacle also held up the eyeball at its tip, staring round and round at him. The two sides remained locked in a standoff, and the atmosphere gradually fell silent. In the end, Eros really couldn't take it anymore and angrily shouted, "If you're going to make a move, then do it already." The tentacle opposite him tilted its eyeball, conveying a kind of puzzled emotion. And Eros sensed that emotion as well. Damn it. How was he able to sense that a tentacle was expressing puzzlement? He was a little bewildered too, but he really truly could sense the emotions that tentacle was expressing. After a long time, seeing that the tentacle still made no move and only kept staring straight at him, Eros cautiously lowered his voice and probed, "You're not here to kill me?" And then, sure enough, to his utter disbelief, he sensed the emotion the tentacle was expressing. At that moment, the emotion the tentacle was expressing was curiosity, though he was still somewhat wary. But after sensing that the tentacle seemed to hold no killing intent toward him and was merely curious, the heart that had been hanging high in suspense finally settled, and his body immediately went limp as he collapsed to the ground.